Welcome to the Made Leader podcast. I'm so glad to have you on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And can you give the listeners a little bit of an intro on you?
Sure. So I am an executive coach and leadership consultant. I primarily work with individuals and executive teams to help them harness the strengths of their leadership teams, particularly the neurodivergent folks on their teams, to promote the celebration of cognitive diversity, but also really truly harnessing the strengths of it to drive better individual performance, team performance, and organizational performance.
Great. We're going to get into the nitty gritty of all of that. But before we get started in that, what is the biggest lie that we tell people about leadership?
I think the biggest lie we tell people about leadership is that there is one right way to do it. And I think different organizations will subscribe to a model, right? Whether that's servant leadership or something else. We have a million buzzwords to describe it, but really what leadership needs to be is situational. Leadership needs to be flexible. I think if we've learned anything from the past 5 years, we know that anything can happen, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's large swings, upswings and downswings in the market. I think what we need to learn is that leadership requires flexibility. And there's no one model that's going to work. But what we need to do is create the capacity for a leader to operate on a principled level, to have a core set of frameworks and principles, and to be able to apply that in a thoughtful way to the situations that come before them. And there are so many ways that can be applied. There's so many ways to attack any problem. And so it's not about categorization and it's not about fitting into a mold. It's about working together to get the best possible outcome.
Yes. Hopefully everyone who's listening just exhaled and said, okay, I don't have to fit into this mold of leadership, right? I mean, you even see people like, you always hear about like Steve Jobs is put up on this pedestal of,
Yeah.
he was such a brilliant leader. And he was in many ways, but that doesn't mean you need to lead just like him,
Yeah.
right? And so giving people that flexibility of you never know what's going to be thrown at you.
Yeah.
And then thinking about how your strengths and how can you leverage those. So
Very much so.
thank you for that.
Of course.
Well, thinking about your career trajectory, your career went very far. It still is going far, but you went to the chief people officer role, which many people really aspire to get to. And you have ADHD and autism.
Yes.
So talk to me about the challenges along the way, but along with how did you leverage the strengths of your brain to get to that level?
Yeah, I think, again, the biggest challenge is trying to fit yourself within the context of a mold. So I'll say I spent the early part of my career in management consulting. I did tours of duty at a lot of big names, so like Accenture and PwC and EY. And even when you think about how they evaluate the performance of their consultants, there is a model of what you should do, how much of your time should be spent where. They have very almost stringent methodologies for how you drive forward a specific type of project, right? When you think about these larger firms, they make their margins by repeating the same things over and over again and literally like pulling from decks and making modifications. And so the biggest challenge I had in those places, and I ended up becoming successful there, but the biggest challenge I had was not being able to extend beyond what existed. Right. And so we think about some of these models that they're using. And at that time, you had, 3 to 4 generations operating in the workforce, and the models had been created 15 years before. And so they're, from a neurodivergent perspective, the way my brain operates is a little bit different. And I would start to see different types of patterns coming up. And I would say, why aren't we personalizing these things a little bit more? Like, why are we taking this in terms of just where the project is versus what types of people are engaging with the changes that we're making? And so I would say what drove greater success is starting to listen, starting to develop my own confidence and listening to my own wisdom and influencing the people around me to look at things a little bit differently. Now, there were projects in which that was quite successful, and there were projects in which that wasn't necessarily appreciated because, again, you're trying to maximize your margins. So I would say one of the biggest lessons from earlier in my career is do whatever you can to know yourself. Acknowledge your strengths, acknowledge those, ways of thinking and operating that are unique to you, that you bring to the situation, and try to find ways to harness it. And if you're in circumstances and environments in which that's not appreciated and you're not able to harness that, then think critically about where else you might go. And so that's what led me into the technology sector. I started looking for interesting in-house roles at technology companies that were willing to push the map, that took pride in innovation. That word was utilized and weaponized in so many different ways, and creativity. And so I wanted a different playground. And so moving to tech is honestly what helped me drive a significant rise. I almost meteoric rise. I moved up very quickly once I found the space in which I was going to be successful. And then I made my way up to the chief people officer space, because I realized I love helping people be successful, helping people find and be the best versions of themselves. And that was the best platform to do it.
All right, so let me dig into a little bit of when you were in management consulting and you were finding that, this is a great pattern. Don't you see this? And they're
Yeah.
like, no, thanks, Rita.
Yeah.
We're good here. How long did you wrestle with that? In other words, like thinking, I should stop doing that because it doesn't fit in here, versus, no, this is actually a really great skill that I just need to go somewhere else. What did that process look like?
I mean, every female consultant who grew up in my time has been called aggressive, every successful female consultant. So that was in my first ever performance evaluation. I'd only been there a few months, but I remember my career advisor sitting me down and being like, "You're very aggressive." And I was like, my guy.
They use the word aggressive?
Aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, and again, in my mind, I was like, it's like 2010, 2011. I think we can do better than aggressive, but all right, cool. We're not leaning in right now. But again, there's constant pressure for you to fit a mold. There's also this element of egocentrism at these large organizations. We've spent millions of dollars. We've done this work at the biggest companies in the world. How could you possibly know better than us when we've already done this at Microsoft and all of these other places? So the initial reaction to this is, you're right, I'm a sponge. I'm new to this. I'm still very young in my career. So I'm going to sit here and listen. And then at a certain point, when you become more and more client facing, you start to develop the confidence to say, I am here to serve them. I'm not here to just serve the organization. At the end of the day, the client is paying a lot of money for my time, and I have a fiduciary obligation to do right by that client. And so really thinking about the question, who do I serve, is what helped me bring the confidence to say, okay, fine, you need me to put everything into decks and things like that that look like this, but the client is asking me and the client needs look a little bit different. So I'll spend a little bit more time, and I'll spend a little bit more time with the client. And then you've got this beautiful feedback mechanism where the client is now talking to the partner on record and saying, no, she's fantastic. She's doing exactly what we need. Okay, so now we have some calls that are behind us and some confidence building. But it is, again, large organizations operate in a certain way and it makes sense for them. There's less flexibility in a large organization, and it's part of it is what they've done has worked for them for so long, and part of it is managing risk. You can't have a lot of baby consultants running around and doing things exactly the way they want. So I understand where they came from, but I really started to thrive when I started asking myself that one question, which is, who do I serve and how do I drive value in this situation? And what do I bring to this table that I can use to drive the greatest possible value for them?
Yes. I love that you went there. I mean, we all have to go through these stages in our career where we're like going, yeah, something doesn't fit, right? Is it experience? Do I need to just sit and absorb? And then at some point you're like, this, it's like, it's a culture fit, right?
Yeah.
With how you show up and how you need to lead or how you need to work. I remember going from one department to another, and it felt like I could breathe again, right? Going to this, you could kind of be yourself a little bit more, going to a culture that's going to say, oh, thank you, Rita, for these patterns. This is actually very helpful. And it shows it paid off.
Yeah. It's all about finding your spaces. And again, I hopped between 3 different large consulting firms. On some level, they're all kind of the exact same thing. They just, serve slightly different clients, or I would land in a slightly different practice. And I recognize that some firms were a little bit more flexible than others, but they all had the general pattern. And so for me, the right choice was just extricating myself from that. I'm very grateful for the time I had in management consulting. I'm a consultant right now. I run my own practice, and I can bring the strengths that I learned there around client management and client service and structure and how to build a beautiful deck. I bring all of those strengths with me, but my success came when I picked myself out of that very rigid environment, and I put myself exactly where I could let my brain go wild, and that was appreciated, and that was value driving.
Yes, I love that for you. And I think it maybe gives people hope to just sit and reflect and think about how they need to work and is their current situation helping them work at their best. Now, we talked about, or we will talk about neurodivergent leadership.
Yeah.
And so, what does that mean and what does it actually look like day to day?
Yeah. So, neurodivergence is often associated with specific pathologies, like specific conditions, right? ADHD probably being the most common one identified and discussed today. But it also includes autism spectrum disorder, so folks who are on various stages of the spectrum, synesthesia. And so there are a number of different conditions. But fundamentally, the way I would think about it is your brain processes information a little bit differently. So no matter what you do as you're approaching the world, your brain takes inputs from the places around you, the situations and the environment around you, and the situations in which you're in. It processes them in a certain way, and then you have outputs and outcomes coming from that. And so what I would say is for a neurodivergent brain, depending on where you are or what your experiences are or your conditions, the data in the input stage is potentially going to look different. So you might take a lot more from different parts of the environment than someone who's neurotypical, who's following a very linear pathway. You will process that a little bit differently. So there are certain skill clusters that are very common with folks who are neurodivergent, pattern recognition being one of them, information synthesis being another one. So sometimes you'll be working with someone who's neurodivergent and they come to a conclusion that's about 8 steps away. And you're like, whoa, 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 this makes no sense to me. Like work backwards and help catch me up. Mm-hmm. It's because their brain, their processing power looks a little bit different. The way in which they process that information, the speed at which they've done so, and the patterns that they've identified are just a little bit different. And of course, the outputs look different. Now, I'm going to be honest. I use the term neurodivergent because right now that's the zeitgeist. But I think what we're starting to learn more, what the research is telling us is this sort of narrow grounding around this is what's neurotypical and this is what's neurodivergent is eventually going to meld into just a conversation around neurodiversity in general, right? Like I think it's cognitive diversity. Our brains all operate on a slightly different level. And that's okay. And they're going to be on various different spectrums in terms of how fast you process information, how well you make patterns, some of these other strengths around, social connection and sensory, sensory inputs and things like that as well, sensory sensitivity. And I think we're going to move to a conversation around cognitive diversity, but right now we're in the neurodivergent and neurotypical phase.
Yes, it's just so interesting. I have a son who is ADHD. And so we've seen him and I've been lucky in his schools. He's gone to public schools the entire time. It hasn't always worked out because school I think we have those same patterns at work, right? Everyone's going to do this. It almost feels like management consulting. Here's the way we do things. Everyone learns this way. And if you don't, then you need extra help or you got to go to the special classroom, right? And so it's interesting to see the way his brain works and how it can be such a benefit to school, to figuring out problems in the workplace. And it's like, how do we just appreciate those different viewpoints and how everyone's brains get there differently? I hope we live in a world where like everyone just thinks differently. It doesn't matter if we don't need to label everybody, right?
You don't need to label everyone. And it's the segregation part, right? Like, oh, your brain works differently. You must go to the special classroom, which is okay. So you're robbing the rest of the class of the insights that may come from this individual. And it's this common perception that neurodivergence is a disability. It's classified as a disability. And yes, you may need certain accommodations in order to do your best work. But it's I think the conversation around it being a disability is highly marginalizing, right? It sort of separates you into a category that's oftentimes considered less than. And so this is a scenario in which by doing so, you're robbing the world of gifts. You're robbing their workplace, their classroom of these gifts, and you're robbing them of the experience to integrate effectively, to learn new ways, and to get all of that other information and process it the way they want.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go on a tangent. Bear with me. All right, Rita. I watch Survivor. Do you ever watch Survivor?
I'm a diehard Survivor fan.
Thank you. Okay, I've been watching it forever. I love it. That and The Amazing Race. Like, just give it to me all day. So did you watch the last season where, and I'm blanking on her name, she had autism and she was on it? Yes. Oh, Blonde.
Blonde. Yes, I know exactly who you're talking about. Hockey player, hockey coach.
Yes. Thank you. All the names start blending together after a million seasons. But one of the things that I just fell in love with her because of her loyalty, her trust, her team, like the way that she played as a team,
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And if you would, and I'm glad they put someone there with autism because you could see that she's just a normal person like you and I. And I was thinking about how much she would really gel in the workplace
Yeah.
with the loyalty and trust and be just such a valued team member,
Yeah.
better than a lot of other people who, are playing politics and managing up. She's just there to do a good job for the team.
Yeah.
And I love that representation and just putting some of the stigma aside. That's what just made me think of. I think it just brought a different viewpoint, and maybe it is starting to show up in different ways, just to show that hey, everyone's just thinks differently, and that's really all it is.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really appreciated about that season is they did show a meltdown. They did show a
They
meltdown.
did,
They showed a
yeah,
moment in which she was so deeply dysregulated and she needed the intervention of someone that she had confided in and trusted. And he knew, I need pressure on my hands. This is what I need to calm down my sympathetic nervous system in these moments. But having watched every season of Survivor that has ever existed, people have meltdowns. They look different. They might be more verbal. There might be screaming. There might be these things. But by virtue of the way in which we think about neurodivergence, we treat it again as that disability. And I think one of the things that I loved about Survivor that season is they brought it out in the open and they normalized it. And they said, hey, this is just another meltdown and it's fine. And she got through it in that moment. They showed that she is a badass physical player. She is, a cognitive powerhouse. She can do the puzzles. She can compete on every level. The woman's like a mad scientist, right? She's got,
yes,
I think, multiple PhDs. I don't know, but I think that is. I think oftentimes when people think autism, they think Rain Man, and in fact, I've had that conversation even with my mom. Like, love my mother, but when I was sort of talking to her and sort of explaining, I do have this diagnosis, and it's helped me make sense of some of the challenges I faced in my life. She's like, "You're not Rain Man. You're not Rain Man. Like, I know what autism is." And I was like, "No, no." And again, this is a misconception. It does have these other presentations, and you can still be a badass and have autism. But these are the challenges that come with it.
yeah. A couple things there. One is I remember when my son was going through all the assessments because we were like something feels like he's just different, right? And so they're going through the assessment, and I remember them saying, well, I don't know if we really want to put autism on there because that's going to put them in a box and we don't want to put labels on them. And that's a fair point, right? You put it because then you're automatically categorized and then you think of putting them in special classrooms, which doesn't need to happen. But the other thing, going back to, I'm going to think of the girl's name as soon as we hang up
Yeah.
this, right? They showed the emotional dysregulation, but what I loved about that is that she knew exactly what she needed.
Yeah.
And so think about how many neurotypical people that just lash out and they have no idea what they need. They have no idea that they're emotionally dysregulated. But I love that here's exactly what I need. I need pressure on my hands. I need my safe person.
Yeah.
Right. To be able to speak that, that was impressive.
Yeah. And, whether or not we accept the diagnosis, whether or not we accept the label, that's an individual choice. And then the other individual choice is whether or not you disclose it. But for me, my personal choice has been to disclose it. Even now when I work with certain clients, I'll be quite open with them and I'll say, this is how that presents. So if, I'm on a series of crazy back-to-back meetings or I'm overstimulated, I'm going to very calmly step away, have a 2-minute meditation. I might go take a 10-minute walk and then I'll be right back. And I'll be right as rain. There's nothing going on. There's nothing to be worried about, but I'd like to be transparent about that. And so by disclosing, I wish we were in a place where anyone, regardless of whether they were neurotypical or neurodivergent, could say, hey, these are my needs in the workplace. In order to be the best self, around noon, I'm going to go take a walk alone. I'm going to clear my head. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to come back. For me, the disclosure helps me advocate for that and ask that for myself. And for a lot of neurodivergent people, it does as well. But I do think that also creates the spaciousness for neurotypical folks to have these conversations. So really, this benefits everyone.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking if a leader is saying, hey, here's what I need, here's how I function best, right? I was talking to someone, I was recording another episode and just talking about how when I was a leader in corporate, I like my downtime. I'm probably skewed to the introverted side, and I need that to recharge. So I think leader saying, hey, this is how I function best. If I have my door closed, it's not because I don't want to talk to you, it's because I need that moment to myself, right? So I think that creates that modeling. Not sure we're there yet, but that is definitely helpful, I think, for leaders to do that. Now, if you are a leader, so the leaders listening, sometimes I imagine, I may ask this a different way. So for leaders listening, how often do some of these neurodivergent um, diagnosis present as performance problems? Like how do they get a little intertwined? If you're a leader and you're going, okay, is it really performance or is it something different? How do you distinguish between the two?
It comes up. It comes up quite a bit. It's oftentimes the traits and challenges that you have as it relates to neurodivergence can oftentimes, particularly when it's undiagnosed, show up as a negative performance review. And again, this is exacerbated. Let's say you have been diagnosed and you know your conditions. There's a lot of risk in disclosure. Not every workplace is as forward thinking as we would love for them to be. And so you're sitting in this place and you're being chastised because you're disruptive in meetings. You have this idea and you need to vocalize it. Okay, so now that's considered a performance issue. And the way in which we navigate performance issues in the workplace is more punitive than productive today, in my opinion. And so I think what would be the better choice, whether you're neurodivergent or not, is to have a conversation around these are some challenges. What are your needs? And let's express our needs and see if we can come together with some practices that are helpful. So if you are disruptive, if you have these ideas and you're highly vocal and your ADHD is presenting in this way, or you're highly inattentive, let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about it as a behavior and not a performance issue and say, this is an observation that I have. And this is the impact on the team right now. I want to understand it from your perspective. Like, help me understand what's going on in your head during these moments. Is there a different way that we can express this? Or if you need free-flowing brainstorming time, or if you need to be able to review materials in advance in order to get your thoughts down on paper, brainstorm on your own, and then bring that to the meeting, that's okay too. These are easy things that we can implement processes or practices in so that we can all work better together. But that requires us to think about workplace performance as something that we can collaborate on together, and that it's a team sport. We're all here to support each other and do great work together versus we're competing against one another. And again, it can often go to this like deeply punitive place. Most of the folks that I work with on a one-on-one basis tend to be senior leaders. So they've maybe experienced some of this earlier in their career, but they've been able to move past it and they're thinking about those inclusive practices for their teams now. But I have recently been engaging with a lot of newer leaders, younger leaders, or even senior individual contributors that are stalled from moving up because they have these challenges and they're not recognized in the right way and they're not debated and discussed and supported in the right way.
So how do you recommend for them? So if there is an early leader listening who is neurodivergent, how do you recommend that they navigate the system, right? Because the system is still, is more prioritizes the neurotypical, right? You get in line, you do things the way the culture is around here. So how do you suggest they navigate that?
Yeah. So there's two components to this. Yeah. And I'll say there's the stuff that's very easy for you to control, and that's within yourself. There's a secondary component that's somewhat easy to control, and that's if you're a leader, the team that you have and the practices you set for them. And then there's the third part, which is partially in your control, but also there's so much that's outside of your control. And that's the team that you're sort of part of, that you report into, that you participate in. When it comes to you as an individual, the greatest gift you can give yourself is self-awareness. So doing an inventory, like really looking into yourself and saying, what are the challenges and how have they presented themselves? What are my needs as it relates to them? Let me think about my operating system even, and think about what are some changes I can make? So one of the things I talk to my clients about is even just let's talk about your routines. When do you get your physical activity? When is that best for you? When is your energy high and best for productive work? And when is it better for meetings? And how do we structure your days in such a way that you're getting the most out of them? What are the things that we can automate? So, for me, for some of my clients, we have smart home the heck out of our spaces. And so The lighting adjusts as necessary depending on the time of day because we know ourselves and we've done that work. So there's this operating system refresh that I generally recommend for folks, and that's the sort of individual control. There's setting good boundaries with your team and saying, hey guys, this is how I work best. These are some observations I have. So if you want me to review something, I need it a couple days in advance. If you want to present ideas, this is the way in which I'd like to do that. Or, whatever that looks like. Or I would like an unstructured brainstorming session once a week to solve for X, Y, and Z projects and programs. And then ask the question, what do you need? How do you work best? And so what you're doing there is you're creating the space in which you're going to be successful. You're creating spaciousness for your team to advocate for themselves and be successful. And you're also setting the right example so that as they become leaders, they're going to start to take these practices and proliferate them. Then there's that third bucket. And the best thing that you can do for yourself is take all of the self-awareness and knowledge that you've taken from these two pieces in your operating system, inventory and design, and make requests. You can make requests. And that's the hardest part, is you need the psychological safety to be able to go to the CEO and say, listen, as your chief people officer, these are my challenges in the executive meetings. And this is what would help me be more effective. And I'd like to ask of you. I'd like you to be an advocate and a champion for it. And of course, if anyone else objects, I'm willing to have that discussion. But these are my needs. And I'd like to engage in that productive discussion around needs and how we can meet each other so that we can all be more effective together. It takes a lot of courage to have that. It takes a high degree of trust in the environment. But at a certain point, the number of clients I have who haven't disclosed, they're in C-suite level positions and they don't feel comfortable disclosing. And so they say, how do I even ask? How do I even bring this up? It's not easy, but you got to find that trust. And if you don't trust your boss, if you don't trust the CEO, who is your peer? Who is your closest peer? And how can you both advocate for this new practice or this new way of working? What is an experiment that you can run together and then bring that data back to the team to advocate for change?
So how did you go about it? So imagine that you've had these conversations at the level you were in companies. And so how did you open it up? Was it just like you just said, like, here's some things that I need? And
yeah,
walk me through it.
It took some time to build the trust with the team. It took some time to build the confidence and the relationship with the CEO. And I would make these requests, and sometimes they'd be honored and sometimes they wouldn't, because there was, with my in-house positions, your needs may compete with the needs of other people. And I've worked in a lot of turnarounds. I've worked in high stress environments or hyper growth environments. And you kind of have to be, it's very utilitarian at that point, right? The greatest good for the greatest number of people. And so it's okay, but then these are the consequences of that. I'm not going to be as attentive in this meeting, and I may need summary notes that someone else puts together, and I will take them. It may mean that I need to delay certain decisions that you really want to be made in the meeting if I can't get information beforehand to process, because I won't be prepared to make that decision right then. I want to make sure that I have, there's high risk in the decisions that we make. It impacts all of our employees. And so this is going to be the consequence. So you tell me, are you okay with that consequence? Are you okay with that risk? And if not, we got to make some changes here. So it starts there. And then as they start to see you thrive, and as they start to reap the benefits of that thriving, that's when they're saying, okay, let's have these conversations more often. I will say it has been much less of an issue as an outside counsel, as an outside consultant coming into organizations, because I'm very upfront about that even in the contracting process. Hey, by the way, these are the ways of working that are supportive of my needs. If they are, completely divergent from the way your organization needs to operate, we should engage in that conversation productively. And if I'm not the right consultant for you, I won't take on a project unless I can be excellent at it. I want to drive the maximum value for you. And if it's not me, I have an extraordinary network of capable professionals, and I will give you a peer. I'll connect you to some of my peers, and you can find someone that works for you. But it requires, one, an abundance mindset. If you are a consultant, to say it's okay to say no to work. I want to give myself the gift of success, and that gift means being in environments in which I'm going to be successful. It requires courage. And loving yourself and your brain and all the wacky ways in which it operates, and sort of celebrating the benefits that come with that. And it requires taking a very principled approach to how you deliver, whether you're in-house or not.
Yeah. So I love that you said, hey, it can't always be met. I'm going to request something. You can't expect it to be given 100% of the time. But I love that you said, hey, well, then here's what's going to happen. So the decision needs to be delayed, okay, cool. But here's the kind of the ramifications of that, which are fine, right? But at least you're being upfront. I love the clarity that brings.
Yeah. That's all you can do, right? Is offer yourself clarity, offer the people around you clarity, and then, roll with the punches. And you can never expect perfection, but if you can make just a little bit of progress every week towards moving your systems, your workplaces, the environments in which you operate to give you more ease. I like to use the word stasis or equilibrium, right? That's operating at your most natural state. If you can get one step closer each week or each month towards that, then that's a success.
Yeah. When I think of a leader, I know I've coached leaders and talked to leaders who have had trouble building connections with their employees.
Yes.
Whether they're neurodivergent or neurotypical, we don't know, right? But from what I understand about autism, there are people that mask. I think most people mask most days going to work, but specifically with neurodivergence. So how can a leader kind of build that safety without pressing to help people kind of not mask as much, if that's even possible?
Yeah. So vulnerability, right? Like when you take a look at any of the research around psychological safety, it requires a little bit of vulnerability, and a little bit of vulnerability gets a lot in return. So you need to create safety by being open yourself about some of your challenges. You may not be neurodivergent, but I bet you're cognitively diverse in some way. So what are the weird and wacky things that make you you? What are some of your challenges? If you don't have challenges right now, if you are the perfect specimen, talk a little bit about some of your challenges growing up into a leader. Create space for acknowledging that you've failed or you've struggled in the past too, and share some of those stories to make it possible for folks to be open about theirs. At the end of the day, the only person that's not benefiting, and I don't know who doesn't benefit in that context. You're benefiting by being a little bit more open about yourself and creating trust between you and your team members. You're creating safety for them to be the best versions of themselves, and the organization is going to benefit from everyone performing a little bit better.
Yes. Well, I think a lot of when we talk about neurodivergent employees, we think a lot of the challenges or barriers. But we don't often talk about the strength. We have a little bit today. You've talked about the patterns and the things that your brain does differently, which is a beautiful thing. But what may surprise managers about neurodivergent employees?
Yeah. So I have a really interesting client. This is a little tangent, but we'll get to
Go for it.
We'll make it work. I have a client, and the first couple sessions I really struggled sort of connecting with him. And I realized over time it's because he's not as comfortable verbal. Like his verbal communications aren't his best source of communications. He's a doodler. And in a meeting that presents as, like really inattentive, he's like scribbling away, but he's actually listening, processing, and this is helping him process. And so we started engaging in doodle sessions together during our coaching. So we'd have sort of a whiteboard up, and he'd doodle and I would doodle, and I would, ask him to explain specific aspects of the artwork that he was creating. So I would say something that might surprise you. You might have the most brilliant people. They may not sound as brilliant in a way that you assume they need to sound, but you have to be flexible with the inputs and the outputs. And if you can be a little bit flexible with the inputs and outputs, and a little bit more curious, ask, don't assume, the value you can get out of that, the juice that you can get out of those people is extraordinary. This guy's brilliant. We're talking about like the chief product officer of an organization. And, some of his peers have been really frustrated working with him because they feel like it's pulling teeth, but it's like, meet him where he is. Like doodle together, go for a walk. Like it doesn't always have to be the super verbal conversation. It can be tangential. You can get there eventually, and sometimes it might take more. But with a chief product officer, the juice is in the creativity. Like you want that creative thinking, and so you don't want to hamper their ways of operating and their ways of thinking by pushing them into a box and saying, "I need a report that's structured exactly this way." You can create more spaciousness for those inputs and outputs. So that's
God, Rita. Sorry, think about how more interesting reports would be if it was doodled. I mean, you don't want to see my doodles. They'd be pieces of shit, but like I'm sure this person would make a beautiful report.
Whatever, like Anytime I've spent some time in internal communications and external communications, and there are two components, which is say what you need to say, but say what people need to hear in a way that they can hear it. And so there is a way for these people to triangulate that, but it's always, if they're starting from the position of, I need to structure in this way, it's going to be really hard for them to get their ideas out on that page. But if you allow them to start from a place of, this is what I need to say, and then help them excavate from that and determine how to present that, that's a different conversation, and it gives them more space to be themselves.
Yeah. I'm just thinking the way I think is just this one way, right?
Yeah.
And so often I've caught myself as a facilitator. It's a lot of reflection, it's a lot of discussion, but it's not like anything more creative and artsy, which some people, that's completely their jam. And it's good for me to do that, to get out of my comfort zone and do something completely different.
Yeah. I'm a zigzagger. Yeah, like I'm a zigzagger. My logic zigzags all the time. And so I'm a master's student right now at Penn, and I'm doing some work again around the neurodivergent leadership. And, I've had conversations with professors, and I do best if I've got my little remarkable with me, because I'll start from this concept and then I'll zig over to a different concept, and I'll just write a bunch of stuff on the page and I'll explain the logic in the zigzaggy way, but then they'll follow. So like having a visual cue, and the best professors that I really jive with allow me to think in that way. And they'll follow the logic, and then they'll sort of interject and work in that way. I have the capacity to do all of this on my own and come back and structure in a storyboard way that you are going to absorb it. But by meeting me where I am, you're going to see the thought process as it is formed. And if you have thoughts in between to interject, that's going to create a richer discussion and a better outcome and output.
Yes. Yes, it's just, I guess, paying attention and asking questions, right? So observing what they, like you observed with your coaching client, just not as verbal, right? Paying attention makes a difference.
Yeah.
So Rita, if you were to have coffee with an early leader tomorrow morning, and we'll just say, we're not going to label anyone anything, just an early leader who is, trying to figure out their way, what would you encourage them to start and stop?
Stop apologizing for being yourself. Just stop it. You are who you are. It's a great thing. You don't have to apologize for not being like everyone else. Like, there's real juice and real value in who you are. So that's the number one thing to stop. And then the number one thing to start is some form of awareness practices, right? I'll say it again, the greatest gift you can give yourself, whether you're neurotypical, neurodivergent, wherever you are, the greatest gift you can give yourself is self-awareness. Understand your patterns, understand your challenges, understand what it feels like to you when you're dysregulated and when you're regulated. Understand what helps you get regulated when you're dysregulated. Get to a place where you can zoom out of your body. You can move from the dance floor up to the balcony and see yourself operate and say, oh, this is a good moment. This is not a good moment. This is what would make me happier or more effective in this moment. Give yourself that gift. So start that inventory, start that noticing, and invest that time in whatever awareness practices. There's circling, there's meditation, there's journaling. Give it a go and start to expand on that, because that's what's going to help you move into those higher levels of leadership, is self-awareness and self-regulation.
Yes. Amen. And also Survivor. Her name was Eva.
Eva! Oh my God, she was the best. I adored her. And Joe.
Something you said when you were talking about that, it just popped in my head. So there you go.
Yeah.
Crisis solved in my head. I can close that loop now.
I think we could talk about Survivor for a very long time.
Oh, I think there's probably a Survivor podcast. You can probably listen to it all, because I always want to talk to someone about it. I make my daughter watch it with me now, but she's not always into it, especially at the beginning when there's a million people. She can't keep up.
Yeah, I know. But sometimes those are the funniest characters.
True. Well, Rita, where can people find out more about you and connect?
Sure. So my big business is called Ixana Consulting. Reach out, www.ixana.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, any thoughts, if you just want to, gab away about what it's like to be neurodivergent in the workplace, or, talk about your successes or your challenges. I'm always available.
Wonderful. I'll link that all up in the show notes. But Rita, before we close out, is there anything you want to leave the listeners with? Maybe I didn't ask you something, or just want to have some parting thoughts.
I mean, celebrate yourself. We're going to have good days and bad days, no matter who we are. And we all have the things that make ourselves unique. And rather than trying to fit yourself in a box, find those things that make yourself unique and reward that, celebrate that, enjoy that.
All right. Great parting words. Rita, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.